The smell of burnt coffee and stale cigarettes hit me as I pushed through the doors of the community center at 8 sharp. 30-some faces turned toward me like I was walking into a courtroom. Karen sat at the head table in her crisp white blazer, looking like she owned the place, which, considering she'd been running this homeowner association for 3 years, she pretty much did. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen's voice cut through the murmur, "we're here to address the ongoing noise violations from 412 Maple Street." She held up a thick manila folder. "I have documented complaints from 5 separate households about excessive noise disturbances." I took a seat in the back row, feeling every eye in the room tracking my movement. Jim Hartley, who I'd helped fix his fence just last month, suddenly found his shoes very interesting when I nodded his way. "The violations occurred at approximately 11:47 p.m. last Tuesday," Karen continued, consulting her notes like she was reading from the Bible. "Loud music, shouting, and what witnesses described as party-like activities lasting well into the early morning hours." My jaw tightened. Party-like activities, right? Me, a bottle of beer, and ESPN Sports Center. "Now, I'd like to hear from our affected neighbors." Karen gestured to a woman in the front row. "Mrs. Henderson, would you share your experience?" The elderly woman stood up, clutching a tissue. "It was awful. The music was so loud I couldn't sleep. My poor cat was terrified, hiding under the bed all night." Music. There it was again. I stood up, my chair scraping against the linoleum. "Excuse me, Mrs. Henderson, but what kind of music was it?" She blinked at me like I'd asked her to solve calculus. "Well, it was very loud music, booming. Rock, country, classical. You must remember something about it if it kept you up all night." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Karen jumped in. "Mr. Coulter, please don't intimidate our witnesses." "I'm not intimidating anyone. I'm asking a simple question about this loud music that apparently terrorized half the neighborhood." I looked around the room. Because here's the thing. There wasn't any music. My pool filter was running. That's it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "The complaints are very clear. Multiple witnesses." "Then let me meet these witnesses." I pulled out my phone. "Mrs. Henderson, what's your address?" I live on Oak Street." I pulled up the map app, fingers moving quickly. "Oak Street, that's 4 blocks away from me, through trees, past the Morrisons' 2-story house, around the bend." I looked up. "Tell me, Mrs. Henderson, how exactly did you hear my pool filter from 4 blocks away when you can't even hear me talking right now without leaning forward?" The old woman's face went red. She sat down hard, no longer clutching that tissue like a lifeline. Karen stood up, her voice sharp as glass. "Mr. Coulter, this is not a cross-examination. We have proper procedures here." "Right, proper procedures." I held up my phone. "I just measured the distance from my backyard to Mrs. Henderson's house, 1/2 mile, but somehow she heard my pool filter over her air conditioning, her neighbor's dogs, and traffic from the main road." Jim Hartley shifted in his seat, finally looking up. For just a second, I thought I saw doubt creep across his face. "The documentation speaks for itself," Karen said, but her voice had lost some of its authority. "The Homeowner Association has received multiple valid complaints about excessive noise violations. The fine is $2,000, and the noise ordinance requires all mechanical devices to be shut down between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. $2,000 for running a pool filter that hummed quieter than most people's refrigerators." I looked around the room one more time. These were my neighbors, people I'd waved to for 5 years, helped during the ice storm last winter, borrowed tools from. Now they sat there like strangers, avoiding eye contact. "You know what?" I said, my voice carrying to every corner of that stuffy room. "I'll pay your fine, but I want to see every single complaint, every signature, every witness statement. Because something about this whole thing smells worse than Karen's cheap perfume." The room went dead silent. Karen's face had gone from confident pink to danger zone red. "How dare you!" "Meeting adjourned," called Harold Webb from the corner. Old Harold ran the hardware store and had been on this board longer than anyone. "We'll review the documentation and reconvene next week." As people filed out, I caught Jim Hartley by the door. "Jim, what the hell was that in there?" He glanced around nervously. Look, Steve, I don't want trouble. Karen says you were making noise. Since when do you listen to Karen about anything? You told me last month she was a power-hungry witch. Jim's shoulders sagged. She mentioned something about your divorce. Said maybe you were having a hard time, drinking more, having people over. He looked genuinely sorry. I figured maybe... The pieces clicked together like bullets sliding into a chamber. Karen hadn't just organized this meeting. She'd been working the neighborhood, planting seeds, watering doubts, cultivating the story she wanted everyone to believe. The recent divorce, the quiet nights that could be spun as suspicious, the pool filter that became evidence of wild parties. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't about noise violations. This was about control, and Karen Whitmore had just declared war on the wrong man. The phone was ringing before I even got my keys out of the ignition. Karen's name flashed on the screen like a warning light. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as I walked up my driveway. Steve, this is Karen Whitmore from the Homeowner Association. I think we got off on the wrong foot tonight. Perhaps we could discuss this situation like reasonable adults. Call me back. Reasonable adults. Right. I deleted the message and headed straight for my backyard. The pool filter hummed its quiet song, just like it had for the past month. I pulled out my phone and downloaded a sound meter app. 38 decibels. For reference, a whisper is about 30. My neighbor's air conditioning unit, currently running full blast, was pushing 45. I was documenting evidence when my phone rang again. This time it was my lawyer, Michelle Torres. Steve, I just got an interesting call. Someone filed a complaint with the city about unpermitted construction on your property. My blood went cold. What kind of complaint? Pool installation without proper permits. They're saying you built it without inspection, no electrical permits, possible code violations. Michelle's voice was tired. She'd been handling my divorce for 8 months, and I could hear the fatigue. Inspector Davis is scheduled to come out tomorrow morning. Michelle, I bought this house with the pool already installed. It's been here for decades. Do you have documentation proving that? I stood there in the dark, listening to the gentle hum of a filter that was somehow destroying my life. I'll find it. You better, because if they determine it was built without permits, the city can order immediate removal, and with your HOA complaint on file, they'll have all the justification they need. After she hung up, I sat on my back deck, staring at the water. The pool looked innocent enough in the moonlight, just concrete and chlorine and the American dream of backyard relaxation. But Karen had turned it into a weapon. The motion light from next door clicked on, and Jim Hartley's silhouette appeared at his kitchen window. He stood there for a long moment, looking out at my yard, then pulled the curtains shut. Have you ever felt like your entire world was shifting under your feet? Like the ground you thought was solid turned out to be quicksand? That's when Rick Stanley's truck pulled into my driveway. Rick was built like a tree trunk, all shoulders and forearms, with hands that could fix anything mechanical. He'd installed my pool's new filtration system 3 weeks ago, upgrading the old one that had finally died after 20 years. Good work, fair price, no hassles. He walked up, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Steve, we need to talk. If this is about payment, Rick, I told you, it's not about money. He glanced around my backyard like he expected Karen to pop out of the bushes. It's about Karen Whitmore. She came by my shop today. I felt my stomach drop. What did she want? She hired me to install a filtration system. Same model as yours, but she wanted modifications. Rick's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. She asked me to make it run louder, a lot louder. What do you mean louder? She wanted me to bypass the noise dampening, remove the insulation, maybe add some extra vibration to the motor housing. Said she was testing it for a friend who lived near water and needed to know how much noise it would make. Rick looked me straight in the eye. I thought it was weird, but the customer's always right, you know? My hands clenched into fists. When did you install it? Last week, 3 days before your incident. Rick pulled out his phone, showed me photos of the installation. Steve, I don't know what kind of game she's playing, but that system she's got now, it's running at nearly 60 decibels, twice as loud as yours. I stared at the photos. Karen's backyard, Karen's pool, Karen's deliberately loud filtration system that had been running the night the cops showed up at my door. She set me up. Looks that way. Rick scratched his beard. There's something else. She paid cash, and she made me sign some kind of non-disclosure agreement. Said it was about proprietary modifications, but he trailed off. But what? But she recorded our whole conversation on her phone. Kept asking me to repeat stuff about how loud it would be, how it might disturb neighbors, whether it violated any noise ordinances. Rick shook his head. I thought she was just being thorough. Now I'm wondering if she was building some kind of case. The pieces were falling into place like dominoes. Karen had installed a loud system, then called in noise complaints about mine. She'd poisoned the well with my neighbors, spreading rumors about my drinking and my divorce. She'd probably timed her calls to the police for maximum effect. Maybe even had someone else make the complaints so her hands stayed clean. Rick, I need a favor. Name it. I need you to measure the sound levels of both systems. Document everything. And I need you to tell me exactly when you installed Karen's system and what she said during the installation. Rick nodded slowly. She's really got it in for you, doesn't she? Yeah, she does. I looked back at my house, thinking about the inspector coming tomorrow, the HOA meeting next week, the $2,000 fine hanging over my head. But she made one mistake. What's that? She involved you, and you keep records. Rick smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Yeah, I do. Photos, timestamps, even some audio recordings of the install process. Standard insurance coverage stuff. You think that audio picked up anything interesting? Oh, it picked up plenty. Rick pulled out a small digital recorder, including Karen explaining exactly why she wanted the system loud enough to get that bastard next door in trouble with the law. For the first time in days, I felt something that wasn't anger or frustration. I felt hope. But as Rick's truck disappeared down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen Whitmore wasn't done with me yet. In fact, I had the distinct impression that the real war was just beginning. Inspector Davis showed up at 7:30 in the morning with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and the enthusiasm of a man who'd rather be home drinking coffee. He was thin as a pencil, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and had the kind of mustache that suggested he took municipal codes very seriously. Mr. Coulter, City Building Department, I'm here about the complaint regarding unpermitted pool construction. I led him to the backyard, where my pool sat looking as guilty as a concrete rectangle could manage. Davis walked around it slowly, making notes, taking photos, measuring distances from the house and property lines. When was this installed? He asked, not looking up from his clipboard. The pool's been here since I bought the house 5 years ago. Before that, I'm not sure. The previous owner said it was built in the 80s. Davis frowned. Do you have the permits? I never needed permits. It was already here. That's not how this works, Mr. Coulter. All structures require permits, regardless of when they were installed. If this pool was built without proper documentation, it's considered a code violation. I felt the trap closing around me. What does that mean? It means you have 30 days to provide proof of proper permitting, or the structure will need to be removed. Davis clicked his pen with the authority of someone who could ruin your summer with a signature. The complaint also mentions possible electrical violations and inadequate setbacks from property lines. Complaint from who? Davis consulted his paperwork. Anonymous tip called in yesterday evening. Very detailed information about potential code violations. Anonymous, of course it was. Davis spent another 20 minutes measuring, photographing, and generally treating my pool like a crime scene. When he finally left, he handed me a thick packet of forms and a deadline. 30 days to produce permits that might not exist, or watch them tear down a pool that had been here longer than some of my neighbors. I called Michelle Torres from my kitchen, watching through the window as Karen emerged from her house to water plants that looked suspiciously healthy for plants that needed watering at 8 in the morning. Michelle, they want permits for a pool that's older than the permit system. Steve, I'm going to be honest with you. This is starting to feel personal. First the HOA complaint, now the city inspection. Michelle paused. Who did you piss off? Karen Whitmore, HOA president, lives 3 houses down. The blonde woman in the white SUV. I've seen her at the courthouse. She files a lot of complaints. That stopped me cold. What kind of complaints? Neighbor disputes mostly. code violations, noise complaints, property line issues. She's been involved in at least 6 cases I can think of, always as the complaining party. Michelle's voice carried a new edge. Steve, I think you need to understand what you're dealing with here. This woman makes a hobby out of neighborhood warfare. After hanging up, I spent the morning in my basement, digging through boxes of paperwork the previous owner had left behind. Insurance documents, utility bills, repair receipts, and finally, buried in a manila envelope marked pool stuff, I found it. Building permit, Yarka 84 Ajata 1247, issued March 15, 1987, for residential swimming pool installation and associated electrical work. Signed, stamped, approved. The pool was completely legal, installed 3 years before Karen Whitmore had even moved to this neighborhood. I was photographing the document when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people I didn't recognize, a man in a suit and a woman with a camera. Mr. Coulter, I'm Brad Morrison from Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the noise complaint situation in your neighborhood. I opened the door but kept the chain on. Who told you about that? We received an anonymous tip about ongoing harassment by neighbors using frivolous noise complaints. The caller suggested this might be part of a larger pattern of abuse by homeowner associations. Anonymous tip. Sure, I let them in, mostly because I was curious about Karen's next move. Morrison was smooth, professional, the kind of reporter who specialized in human interest stories and local controversy. His camerawoman set up while he explained their angle. We're doing a series on HOA overreach, and your situation fits perfectly. A divorced man trying to rebuild his life, harassed by neighbors over something as innocent as a pool filter. There it was. The narrative Karen wanted. Poor, drunk, divorced Steve Coulter. The neighborhood nuisance who couldn't handle his problems without making noise for everyone else. That's not exactly how it happened, I said. Well, why don't you tell us your side? For 20 minutes, I laid out the facts. The late-night police visit, the impossible witness testimony, the distances that made the complaints physically impossible. Morrison nodded along, asked follow-up questions, seemed genuinely interested. But as the interview went on, I noticed something. Every question pushed me towards sounding defensive, angry, possibly unstable. The editing would be devastating. One last question, Mr. Coulter. Have you been drinking more since your divorce? I stood up. Interview's over. Morrison smiled like he'd just gotten exactly what he came for. Thank you for your time, Mr. Coulter. This should air tomorrow night. After they left, I sat on my front steps and called Rick Stanley. Rick, I need that audio recording, and I need it today. Already thought of that. I'm bringing it over this afternoon, along with the sound measurements from both systems. There's something else. Channel 7 News just left my house. Someone tipped them off about the HOA situation. Rick was quiet for a moment. Steve, you know what this is, right? This isn't about noise. This isn't even about the pool. What is it about? It's about power. Karen Whitmore runs this neighborhood like her personal kingdom. And you had the balls to question her in public. Now she's going to destroy you as an example to everyone else. I looked down the street toward Karen's house. Her white SUV was gone, probably out planting seeds for whatever came next. Rick, when you come over this afternoon, bring your truck. Why? Because we're going to do some measuring of our own, and I want to record Karen's system running at full volume. Steve, be careful. If she's willing to go this far, she should have been more careful herself. I stood up, feeling something shift inside me. The defensive phase was over. It's time Karen Whitmore learned what happens when you pick a fight with someone who's got nothing left to lose. The war was about to get very interesting. Rick showed up at 4 with his toolbox, a professional sound meter, and a grim expression that matched my own. We spent an hour documenting everything. My system running at 38 decibels, the distance measurements, the property lines, the sight lines that made the witness complaints physically impossible. Then we walked down to Karen's house. Her filtration system was a monster. It rumbled and vibrated like an angry washing machine, rattling the fence boards and sending vibrations through the ground. Rick's meter hit 54 decibels before he even got close to the property line. Jesus, Steve, this thing could wake the dead. I pulled out my phone and started recording video. And somehow, Nobody's complained about this one. That's when Karen's back door opened. She came striding across her yard in designer jeans and a pink polo shirt, looking like she was ready for a tennis match instead of a neighborhood showdown. "Excuse me, gentlemen, you're on my property." "Actually, we're on the sidewalk," I said, holding up the sound meter. "Public property, just measuring noise levels." Karen's eyes went sharp when she saw the device. "That's harassment." "No, that's documentation. Your system is running at 54 decibels, Karen. Mine runs at 38, yet somehow mine's the problem." "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Rick stepped forward with his phone, showing her the timestamp photos from the installation. "These were taken during the installation of your deliberately modified system, the one you specifically requested to run louder than normal." For the first time since this whole mess started, Karen looked genuinely rattled. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Rick pressed play on his digital recorder. Karen's own voice filled the air, crystal clear. "I want it loud enough to get that bastard next door in trouble with the law." The color drained from Karen's face. That was taken out of context. "Really?" I pulled out my own phone. "Because I've got the building permit for my pool right here, issued in 1987, 3 years before you even moved to this neighborhood. So how exactly did my legally installed, properly permitted pool become your business?" Karen's composure cracked like ice under pressure. "You can't prove anything." "I can prove your system violates the same noise ordinance you tried to use against me. I can prove you deliberately modified it to be louder. I can prove you filed false complaints with fake witnesses." I stepped closer. "And I can prove you called the news station to paint me as the crazy neighbor." "You're delusional." "Am I? Let's find out." I dialed a number on my phone, put it on speaker. "Michelle, it's Steve. I need you to file a formal noise complaint against 436 Maple Street. Excessive mechanical noise. Violation of Municipal Ordinance 43B. Karen's eyes went wide. "You can't." "I can and I am." I looked her straight in the eye. "See, Karen, the difference between you and me is that when I file a complaint, I have actual evidence." Rick held up the sound meter, still reading 54 decibels. "Want me to call Inspector Davis too?" That's when Karen Whitmore showed her true colors. "This is harassment! I'm calling the police!" She fumbled for her phone, fingers shaking with rage. "You're trespassing! You're threatening me!" "We're standing on a public sidewalk, documenting noise violations. But please call the police. I'd love to play them Rick's recording." Karen's face went from pink to red to something approaching purple. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think this is over?" "I think you picked the wrong target." "We'll see about that." She spun on her heel and stormed back toward her house. "This isn't finished, Steve Coulter." "No," I called after her. "It's not." Rick and I packed up our equipment and headed back to my house. But as we walked away, I caught sight of Karen through her kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. "She's making calls," Rick observed. "Yeah, the question is, to who?" We didn't have to wait long to find out. 20 minutes later, 3 cars pulled up in front of my house. Jim Hartley climbed out of the first one, looking uncomfortable. Harold Webb emerged from the second, his weathered face set in hard lines. The third car produced 2 people I didn't recognize. They stood in my driveway like a delegation, Jim shifting from foot to foot while Harold took the lead. "Steve, we need to talk." I stepped onto my front porch, Rick beside me. "About what, Harold?" "About this situation with Karen. It's gotten out of hand." "You're right, it has. Karen filed false police reports, submitted fake witness statements, and installed equipment specifically designed to frame me for noise violations." Harold held up his hand. "That's enough. I don't want to hear accusations." "They're not accusations. They're facts. We have recordings, measurements, documentary evidence." I pulled out my phone. "Want to hear Karen explaining how she wanted her system loud enough to get me in trouble with the law?" The group exchanged glances. Jim finally spoke up. "Hey, Steve, maybe you were right about some things, but this has got to stop. The whole neighborhood's talking. People are taking sides. Kids are asking questions." "Then maybe someone should have thought about that before they decided to destroy an innocent man's life over a pool filter." One of the strangers stepped forward. He was younger, maybe 40, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been really challenged. "Mr. Coulter, I'm David Chen, Karen's attorney. My client is prepared to drop all complaints and waive the HOA fines if you agree to cease this harassment campaign." I laughed, actually laughed. Harassment campaign? Your client filed false police reports, submitted perjured witness statements, and conspired to frame me for violations I didn't commit. And you're calling documentation of her crimes harassment? Chen's smile never wavered. My client denies those allegations, but she's willing to let bygones be bygones if you're reasonable. Here's what's reasonable, I said, looking at each of them in turn. Karen's system gets shut down until it complies with noise ordinances. She publicly apologizes for the false complaints, and she resigns from the HOA board. Harold snorted. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious, because if she doesn't, this gets very public, very fast. News cameras, police investigations, the whole 9 yards. Chen stepped closer. "Mr. Coulter, I don't think you understand the position you're in. A recently divorced man, struggling with alcohol issues, harassing female neighbors." "Careful, counselor." Rick's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. "That sounds awful close to slander to me." The lawyer looked at Rick like he'd just noticed him. "And you are?" "Rick Stanley, licensed contractor, witness to fraud, and holder of recorded evidence of criminal conspiracy." Rick smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Also the guy who's going to testify when this hits court." Something shifted in the group dynamic. Jim stepped back. Harold's confidence wavered. Even Chen looked less sure of himself. "Gentlemen," I said, "you have 24 hours to present Karen's decision. After that, everything goes public." As they walked back to their cars, I heard Jim mutter to Harold, "Maybe we should have listened to his side of this earlier." But it was Chen's parting words that stuck with me. "This isn't over, Mr. Coulter, not by a long shot." Standing on my porch, watching their taillights disappear, I realized Karen had just escalated this fight to a whole new level. And I was ready for it. The envelope was waiting for me on my doorstep the next morning, unmarked and sealed. Inside was a single photograph, my ex-wife Jennifer, leaving what looked like a lawyer's office downtown, and a note written in neat cursive handwriting. "Some divorces never really end. A friend." My hands went cold. Jennifer and I had signed the papers 3 months ago. Clean break, no kids, split the assets down the middle. She'd moved to Portland to start over, and we'd agreed to leave the past buried. Apparently, Karen had other plans. I was still staring at the photo when my phone rang. Jennifer's number. "Steve, I just got a very strange phone call." "From who?" "A woman claiming to be from some homeowner association. She said you were having problems, drinking problems, that you'd been arrested for disturbing the peace and might be violating our custody agreement." "Jen, we don't have kids. We don't have a custody agreement." "I know that, but she seemed to know an awful lot about our divorce, about the settlement, about my job in Portland, about..." Jennifer paused. "Steve, who is this woman?" I explained the whole situation while pacing my kitchen. The pool complaints, the fake witnesses, the modified filtration system. Jennifer listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "This sounds insane." "Yeah, it is." "But Steve, there's something else. The woman on the phone, she mentioned something about you having financial problems, about the divorce settlement putting you in debt." Jennifer's voice got smaller. "She said you might try to sue me to get more money." Ice water hit my stomach. Our divorce had been amicable, but the financial records were private. How the hell did Karen know the details? "Jen, I would never..." I know you wouldn't. But Steve, she had specifics. She knew about the house refinancing, about my job offer in Portland, about the timing of everything." Jennifer paused. "Someone's been digging into our lives." After we hung up, I called Michelle Torres. "Michelle, can divorce records be accessed by third parties?" "Some portions are public, but the financial details are sealed unless..." "Steve, why are you asking?" I told her about the phone call, about the photograph, about Karen's apparent knowledge of private information. "That's illegal," Michelle said flatly. "If she's accessing sealed court documents or hiring investigators to harass your ex-wife, that's criminal behavior. We can file charges." "How would she get access to sealed records?" She wouldn't, not legally. Michelle was quiet for a moment. Steve, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest. Have you ever been to Patterson, Blake & Associates? Never heard of them. Why? Because that's where your photo was taken. Jennifer's new attorney works there, and Karen Whitmore filed 3 separate complaints there last year, all involving neighborhood disputes that required legal representation. The pieces clicked together like dominoes falling. Karen knew lawyers at Jennifer's firm. She had contacts, maybe even inside information about ongoing cases. Michelle, how far back do Karen's legal complaints go? Let me check the database. I heard typing in the background. Jesus, Steve. This woman has filed 43 separate complaints over the past 5 years. Noise violations, property disputes, code violations, harassment charges. And get this, she's won most of them. What do you mean, won? Oh, settlements, drop charges, people moving away. She's basically weaponized the legal system to run people out of the neighborhood. Michelle paused. Steve, you're not her first target. You're not even close. That afternoon, I drove to the public library and spent 3 hours researching property records, court filings, and newspaper archives. What I found made my blood run cold. In the past 5 years, 7 families had moved away from our neighborhood under contentious circumstances. The Hendersons, noise complaints and code violations. The Martinez family, harassment charges and property line disputes. The Johnsons, HOA fines that bankrupted them. All of them had lived within 3 blocks of Karen Whitmore. All of them had left after prolonged legal battles. And all of their houses had been purchased by the same property management company, Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Oh, I called Rick from the library parking lot. Rick, I need you to look up something for me. Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Tell me who owns it. Hold on, I heard typing. Okay, here we go. Whitmore Holdings, Incorporated 2019. Primary business address. Steve, this is Karen's address. She's the sole owner. How many properties does she own in our neighborhood? More typing. 7 residential properties, all purchased between 2020 and 2024. All of them. Rick paused. Steve, every single house she owns was previously owned by people who had legal disputes with the HOA. The pattern was clear now. Karen would target a family, harass them with legal complaints and HOA violations, make their lives miserable until they were forced to sell. Then her company would swoop in and buy the properties, probably at below-market prices from desperate sellers. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was running a real estate scam using legal harassment as her weapon. I was driving home when my phone rang again. Unknown number. Mr. Coulter, this is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the Sheriff's Department. I need to ask you some questions about a harassment complaint that's been filed against you. My heart stopped. What kind of harassment complaint? A Karen Whitmore claims you've been stalking her, taking photographs of her property and threatening her with violence. She has witness statements and photographic evidence. Detective Rodriguez, Karen Whitmore has been running a systematic campaign to force me out of my neighborhood. I have recordings of her admitting to fraud, documentation of false police reports. Sir, I need you to come down to the station. We can discuss this properly there. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but I strongly suggest you bring an attorney. After I hung up, I sat in my driveway staring at my house. Karen had just played her trump card. While I'd been gathering evidence of her scams, she'd been building a case to paint me as the dangerous one. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd escalated this into criminal territory, which meant the police would have to investigate both sides of the story. And unlike her previous victims, I had documentation, recordings, and a witness who could prove her pattern of fraud. I called Michelle Torres one more time. Michelle, I need you to meet me at the Sheriff's Department in an hour. What happened? Karen just overplayed her hand, and I think it's time to show the world who she really is. The final battle was about to begin. Detective Rodriguez was a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of patience that comes from dealing with neighborhood disputes for 20 years. She sat across from me in the interview room, a thick file open between us, while Michelle took notes beside me. Mr. Coulter, Mrs. Whitmore claims you've been photographing her home, measuring her property without permission, and making threatening statements. Detective, everything I photographed was from public property. The measurements were of noise levels, which is legal, and the only threatening statement I made was promising to expose her fraud. Rodriguez flipped through her file. She has witness statements from Jim Hartley, Harold Webb, and David Chen confirming that you made aggressive statements and invaded her privacy. Michelle leaned forward. Detective, we have evidence that Mrs. Whitmore has been running a systematic harassment campaign against multiple neighbors over several years. We believe she's using HOA complaints and legal pressure to force property sales for financial gain. That's a serious accusation. It's a documented pattern. Michelle pulled out our research. 7 families forced out of the neighborhood in 5 years, all after legal disputes with Mrs. Whitmore, all of their properties subsequently purchased by her company. Rodriguez studied the documents, her expression growing more serious as she read. This is circumstantial, but it's extensive. There's more. I pulled out Rick's digital recorder. This is Mrs. Whitmore admitting on tape that she deliberately modified her pool system to frame me for noise violations. We played the recording. Rodriguez listened twice, taking notes. Where did you get this? Rick Stanley, the contractor who installed both systems. He records all his consultations for insurance purposes. Rodriguez closed the file and looked at me directly. Mr. Coulter, I'm going to be honest with you. This case is a mess. Mrs. Whitmore filed first, but your evidence suggests she may have been operating fraudulently for years. She paused. I'm going to need to interview Mr. Stanley and examine the physical evidence. Detective, Michelle said, we'd like to propose something. Instead of treating this as a simple harassment case, why not investigate the broader pattern? If Mrs. Whitmore has been using the legal system to defraud neighbors, that's criminal conspiracy. Rodriguez nodded slowly. I'll need to talk to my supervisor, but yes, this could be much bigger than a neighborhood dispute. That evening, Rick and I sat on my back deck, listening to the quiet hum of my legally installed, properly permitted pool filter. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Think she'll back down now? Rick asked. Karen, no, she's too far in to quit now, but she's made a critical error. What's that? She involved the police. Now this isn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. It's a criminal investigation. As if summoned by our conversation, Karen's back door opened. She walked to her fence, staring across at us with undisguised hatred. Enjoying your victory, Steve. There's no victory here, Karen, just consequences. You have no idea what you've started. Her voice carried across the yards like a threat. I've been protecting this neighborhood for years, keeping out the wrong kind of people, maintaining property values, ensuring quality of life, by destroying innocent families, by doing what needed to be done. Karen's mask was completely off now, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. People like the Martinez family, with their loud parties and broken cars in the driveway. People like the Johnsons, who couldn't maintain their lawn or pay their fees on time. People like me. People like you. She smiled, and it was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. Divorced, drinking, making noise, bringing down the neighborhood standards. I stood up, walked to the fence that separated our properties. Karen, in about an hour, Detective Rodriguez is going to serve you with a warrant to search your records. They're going to find evidence of your property scheme, your false complaints, your systematic harassment of families. Her smile wavered. But here's what I really want you to understand. You didn't lose because I was smarter or stronger or luckier. You lost because you forgot something fundamental about people. What's that? When you push someone who has nothing left to lose, they push back twice as hard. Karen stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back to her house without another word. 3 hours later, Detective Rodriguez's car pulled up in front of Karen's house, followed by 2 unmarked vehicles and a van from the county forensic unit. They were there for 4 hours, loading boxes of documents, computer equipment, and files. The next morning, the local newspaper ran a front-page story about the investigation into systematic HOA fraud and neighbor harassment. Channel 7 News, the same station that had tried to paint me as the problem, ran a follow-up piece about Karen's arrest on charges of filing false police reports, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Rick and I watched the news coverage from my living room. "So what happens now?" he asked. "Now Karen goes to trial. The family she drove out will probably file civil suits. The HOA will need new leadership." I shrugged. Life goes on. And the pool? I looked out at my backyard, where the pool sat innocently in the afternoon sun, its filter humming its quiet song. The pool stays right where it's been for 37 years. But as I said it, I realized something had changed. The victory felt hollow. Karen was gone, but so was the sense of community I'd once felt in this neighborhood. Jim Hartley still wouldn't make eye contact when he saw me. Half the neighbors treated me like a hero, the other half like a troublemaker who disrupted their peace. The pool was legal, the noise complaints were dropped, and Karen Whitmore was facing serious criminal charges. I'd won. So why did I feel so alone? Maybe that's the real cost of fighting someone like Karen. Even when you win, you lose something in the process. Trust, community, the simple pleasure of floating in your pool without wondering what the neighbors are thinking. I'd saved my pool, but I'd lost my home in every way that mattered. Sometimes justice and peace aren't the same thing. And sometimes, even when you're absolutely right, victory tastes like ashes in your mouth. The war was over. Karen Whitmore was finished. But as I sat alone by my pool that evening, listening to the filter hum its vindicated song, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd all lost something we'd never get back.